Hey everybody, this is Dr. Snellgrove. Wanted to record a video reviewing chapter 12 with you. So chapter 12 starts on page 286 and it lays out some important concepts about subjects and verbs that are very foundational, I think it's fair to say, for a lot of what we're going to be doing here and a lot of what you're going to be doing as college writers. So just jumping right in, it has some stuff, and I may, gloss over some things quicker than others because I've got a suspicion you probably know some of this. So for instance, they begin talking about action verbs. And I think almost everybody knows what action verb is. They have examples like Rachel drove to the donut shop. Okay, drove is an action verb. She bought a dozen donuts and ate two on the way home. So bought and ate are both action verbs. She wondered why she found sweets irresistible. So all of these are describing physical, or in the last case, mental actions, hence the fact, these are action verbs. And they've got a little practice activity you can look at there where it's like, Carrie went to the Thai restaurant for lunch at least once a week. Okay, well, she went, that is the action verb there. It's literally describing where she went, what is she doing? The twins' vivid red hair draws everyone's attention. It's like, what is it doing to their attention? It's drawing. They're looking over at the hair. James worried about Monday's history test. Okay, something he is doing. He is worrying. All right, so linking verbs, broadly speaking, could be considered all the other verbs. The way your book defines it, links its subject with a word that describes it. Now, the most common ones, as your book gets into on the bottom of page 287, are different forms of to be. So like is, are, was, were, has been, will be, could have been. So these are also considered verbs, right? It's one of the reasons that, it's like, hey, are you going to the store later? I am. It's like, all right, I am counts, as a sentence. It has a subject and a verb, and it completes a thought. That's all you need. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. All right, so on page 288, they have some examples of linking verbs. The dog is hungry. So this is a classic example. There's, no action in this particular sentence, but it's a state of being. The dog is hungry. Is a linking verb. Anne has been a police officer for 10 years. All right, so it's a state of being. How long has she been? Which, in case you're curious, the book jumps around a little bit, but we'll start getting into like past participle and stuff. Why are we saying has been instead of was? The short answer is she still is. So you use this to describe an action that happened in the past and still continues. Tomorrow will be the last day to drop a class without penalty. All right, so these are pretty straightforward. Now, I like that they have this on the kind of the middle of page 288. Examples of verbs that can be action verbs or they can be linked verbs, and it just depends on context. And by the way, I never really appreciated how simply your book explains these things until I started using a different book for a different class, writing and grammar, and they had this the whole weird ways of explaining things like grammatical structures exist in a hierarchy. A linguistic structure must be classified according to its function rather than its form. And that last bit there, that is how that book describes concepts like this. Like, hey, you got to figure this out based on context sometimes. So as an example, you've got in the first one there, the gym socks smelled terrible. All right, so you might confuse this as an action verb, but think about it for a moment. The gym socks don't have a nose. They can't themselves do a terrible job of smelling. So when we say the gym socks smelled terrible, we're describing the state of being of the gym socks. So smelled is being used as a linking verb there, as opposed to the next example, Monica smelled the perfume sample. It's like, okay, Monica smelled, she does have a nose. We are describing what she did with her nose. The pumpkin pie looks tasty. So this is a classic one here where it's like, all right, looks. Well, you might normally associate that as an action verb. He looks west. But here we're saying how the pumpkin pie looks. And it's right back to that idea of like, okay, the pie itself does not have eyes. It can't do a tasty look, whatever the hell that would even mean. Instead, it can look tasty. So looks is serving as a linking verb describing its quality. And then that's in comparison to the dog looks forlornly at every passerby, hoping for a handout. That sounds like my dog. So the dog looks. Okay, the dog does have eyes, and we're describing what the dog is doing with her eyes. Now, that's useful information to know. With that being said, I'm probably going to skip over. There's a whole thing here about like how to figure out if something's a linking verb or an action verb, and then there's an activity where you figure out, which one is which. I'm spoilers. I'm never going to quiz you on that. That's never going to be a part of your as long as you are using your subjects and verbs correctly, you're writing in complete thoughts. I'm more interested in that than whether you can win a little trivia question on, hey, is this an action verb or linking verb? All right, so with that in mind, if you look towards the bottom of 289, we have recognizing verbs and subjects. And some of this may be simpler for you guys than others. Everybody comes into this class to different levels of grammatical experience and ability. All right, so the first two things on page 290 are what we were just talking about. Verbs can show action. The ancient elevator groaned to a stop. Verb may link the subject to the rest of the sentence. The inspection sticker was 3 years out of date. The old lion looked sleepy. And they have a little thing here, just like an FYI, that a verb may consist of more than one word. So like Jamal has been taking flute lessons for 6 years. Gwen might have been going to the library when we saw her this morning. They get into the idea of compound verbs, which is number 4 on page 29. When more than one verb goes with the same subject, it's a compound verb. So it's like, that just means that there's one subject, there's that person or whatever is doing multiple things. So like the meteorologist pointed to a low pressure system on the weather map and predicted rain. So we have two verbs there, action verbs, pointed and predicted. They're linked to one person, in this case, the meteorologist. So hence compound verb. The teller counted the bills twice and handed them to the customer. So counted, handed, but these are things the teller did. So once again, a compound verb. All right. They have a, what do you call it? This may be no duh logical to some of y'all, but number 5, an infinitive, which is just a fancy word for putting to, like to, along with a present tense verb, can't be the verb in a sentence. So it says, Paulo wanted to accept the award on his brother's behalf. And strictly speaking, it's like, hey, well, they have a thing here. The phrase to accept is an infinitive. It can't be the main verb. So instead, the verb is wanted. So some of this is splitting hairs, but it's basically if you guys end up in a position where it's like, hey, which one of these is the actual verb? And that might be stuff that, you do in future quizzes and stuff like that. I hate to say that, it sounds so sinister, but just keep that in mind. These are all just tools in your toolbox for isolating what is the verb. All right, and then the last one, pretty good one here. A verb form ending in ing can't be the verb in a sentence unless a helping verb precedes it. So they have like the setting sun sank below the horizon. And it's like, all right, is setting a verb in this particular case? Well, no, the setting sun sank below the horizon. All right, and to further emphasize that, they have a crowd was gathering at the scene of the accident. So by itself, setting or gathering can't be the verb, right? Unless something else is thrown in there. So in the second example, a crowd was gathering. Okay, there you go. We could have done something like the sun was setting. That would work. But in the original one, the setting sun sank below the horizon, it's actually sank that is serving as our verb. Strictly speaking, it is setting that is serving as an adjective, but we'll get there. All right, so finding verbs on page 291. We'll just look at a few of these because there's 10. I don't think we can do all 10 of these, but we have number 1, a strong breeze filled the sails of the small boat, pushing it toward the shore. All right. So what is a verb here? Filled. All right. A strong breeze filled the sails of the small boat. Right. That's a straightforward kind of action verb. The breeze is filling the sails. Iced tea tastes refreshing on a hot day. All right, so tastes is serving as our verb. It's a linking verb in this case because, as we talked about, it's not like the iced tea is tasting anything. We're just describing the taste of the iced tea. Let's see. Maud bought a black t-shirt with an image of tarantulas on it. Okay, so bought in this case is a verb, a straightforward action verb. She went to the store, she bought a weird shirt. And then Grandpa said the baby looked like him, bald and toothless. Grandpa's got jokes. But here is a pretty straightforward action verb. Grandpa said. It's describing an action he took, what he said in this case. All right. So towards the middle of 291, we have a, hey, how do you find the subject? And I'll go ahead and tell you that for some people, it's easier to find the subject first and then the verb. And then for other people, it's easier to find the verb first and then the subject. Me personally, I am what I like to call a results-oriented guy. As long as you're getting the stuff right on quizzes, as long as you're getting the stuff right in your paper, I don't really care how you go about it. I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I'm just saying you can't argue with the results. All right, so finding the subject, as they say on 291, a subject answers the question, who or what, did something. The verb fills the blank. And so they walk you through, this is maybe a little more laborious than it has to be, but they walk you through on the bottom of 291 how isolating the verbs can help you figure out who the subject is or what the subject is. So the first example, the tour group will fly to Toronto on the 6 p.m. flight. And so in this example, like, okay, will fly. We can isolate that really quickly as a verb in here. So then it's like, oh, that's the verb. Who is doing it? Okay, the tour group will fly, or just group, as a simple subject there. But now, on a fundamental level, who is doing what. We've got the second one. Cedric and Joseph sat on the bench waiting for their mother. All right, sat is a pretty straightforward, action verb. And in this case, who sat? Cedric and Joseph. So we got both. We got two people doing one thing. So previously, we talked about a compound verb where you've got one subject, two verbs. This is a compound subject where you have two subjects, one verb. Cedric and Joseph sat on the bench. And then I think this is the last one. Carefully, Sandra measured the cinnamon and raisins and folded them into the bread dough. So we got two things. Speaking of compound verbs, we've got measured and we've got folded. But who's doing these things? It turns out it's Sandra in each case. So Sandra is the subject in this particular sentence. All right. So I think that's pretty straightforward. We'll look maybe 2 or 3 of these on the top of 292. This little exercise of recognizing verbs and subjects. So number 2, Alberto's posture revealed his exhaustion. Okay, so dealer's choice on what caught your eye first, but revealed is obviously our verb, the posture revealed. Well, I just gave the game away, I guess. It's like, okay, what is doing the revealing? The posture. Alberto's posture revealed his exhaustion. And I know some of this seems very straightforward as I say it out loud, but it's very easy to make rookie mistakes. Like a lot of people look at number 2 and they're like, oh, Alberto's the subject. It's like, not technically, it's Alberto's posture. It's a quality of Alberto is actually the subject there. Let's see. Ophelia's college diploma hung on the wall of her office. So we've got hung as a straightforward verb. Then we've got, okay, what hung? The diploma. So the diploma has to be the subject. I guess I've only got one diploma up in here. I'm not flexing and stunting on them nearly as much as I could. Yeah, there we go. And then number 5, Tracy drove to the post office and mailed her package. So we are back in compound verb territory here. We've got drove, we've got mailed. Those are both very clear action verbs. And then we've got Tracy is the only one doing them. She must be our subject. All right. Now, the next bit is something, I'll be honest with you. When I first started teaching this class and using this textbook, I was a little confused why they dropped prepositional phrase stuff here in this chapter. But I eventually came to learn and respect that, like, this is yet another tool in the how can you, figure out what your subjects and verbs are. All right, so let's talk about prepositional phrases. So they've got it is not a complete list at all, but on the bottom of 292 going to the top of 293, we have a list of frequently used prepositions. So a prepositional phrase, what are we doing with them? And your book actually doesn't really tell you right away, which is kind of funny. So these prepositional phrases give you additional information about the or in the sentence, but here's the key here. Prepositional phrases, strictly speaking, are not necessary. And I don't mean never use them. It's impossible to never use them. But I mean, like, you can actually lift them out of a sentence and still have a complete sentence. So, for instance, I mentioned earlier the basic DNA of any given sentence is subject, verb, complete thought. All right, we got to have all these things. So let's check out this first sentence. Well, the first example sentence, we'll check mark under recognizing prepositional phrases. The rim of the glass is chipped. All right, so imagine that you're trying to figure out what the subject of this is. So if you're doing what we did before, where you find the verb and then work your way backwards, you would say, oh, it must be glass, because you see chipped as the verb, and then, oh, well, glass is the closest thing to chipped. But glass is part of a prepositional phrase, of the glass. So the prepositional phrase is just giving extra info. The actual subject in that sentence is rim. And this is what I mean when I say you could technically take the phrase out. The rim is chipped. So telling us of the glass, that's extra info, that's useful info, but it's not grammatically, structurally necessary. And so we're going to talk a lot more about prepositional phrases as time goes on, but these phrases are usually 3 words. They usually give you extra information, like they have some famous prepositional phrases on 293, like on the road, over the rainbow, against the wind, in cold blood, in living color. Man, I miss that show. Old guys, sorry. So all of these are prepositional phrases, and they're great for writers. They give you, lots of extra info that you can share with people. But as readers, it's important to know that, like, okay, nothing in the prepositional phrase is going to be either subject or verb. So when you are stuck trying to find, subjects and verbs, in particular subjects, all right, just know, like, all right, I got to lift these prepositional phrases out and I'll have a better idea. And speaking of better ideas, hopefully this will help. On the top of page 294, again, we're not going to look at all of these, but they have examples of sentences with prepositional phrases in them and how you can actually remove the prepositional phrases to, one, more adequately identify the subjects and the verbs, right? But also, in a pinch, to simplify your sentences. So number 1 is the vivid colors of the flowers in the blue bowl on the table brighten the room. All right, so there are not 1, not 2, 3 different prepositional phrases in here. Of the flowers is 1 prepositional phrase. In the blue bowl is another prepositional phrase. On the table is a 3rd prepositional phrase. So strictly speaking, you could shorten this sentence to the vivid colors brighten the room. You see how we still have subject, verb, complete thought there. And it also helps you identify the subject. Because once again, if you started with the verb, like brighten is clearly our verb. But then what is actually doing the brightening? It's not table, it's not bowl, it's not flowers, it's the colors are doing the brightening. Everything else is just descriptions of the colors of the flowers in the blue bowl on the table. All right. Man, these all have so many in them. But like number 4 is a basic example. For dessert, I'll have a cup of coffee and a slice of that gooey, rich pecan pie. That sounds like me rolling up to the diner, honestly. So technically, for dessert is a prepositional phrase. Of coffee is a prepositional phrase. Of that gooey, rich pecan pie is a prepositional phrase. And that may not make much sense, but look how you could shorten this sentence if you really wanted to. I'll have a cup and a slice. You know, as long as you're maybe pointing to the pecan pie, the clerk would know what you're talking about. So everything else is just giving additional detail. Nothing wrong with additional detail, but you might want to speak more plainly, write more plainly on occasions. And once again, if you're looking at like, all right, what is modifying? Like, you know, I'll have. So it's basically will have, you know, cup and a slice. You know, what is getting modified here versus, you know, oh, dessert, gooey, rich pecan pie. No, I will have a cup and a slice. Alrighty. So they have a thing here. I guess I'm glad they put this in here about like, is it okay to end a sentence with a preposition? The short answer is almost always. That is a weird rule that people made up, decided was a rule sometime in the middle of the 20th century. And even back when people were making it up, it didn't make a lot of sense. Winston Churchill made fun of this idea one time. You know, somebody told him he couldn't end a sentence in a preposition. He said, "That's a rule up with which I cannot put." Because, of course, with is a preposition. So he was showing how, like, technically, if you follow that rule, your sentences are all going to sound really stilted and weird. Okay, so irregular verbs. I told you we'd get there sooner rather than later. It turns out it was sooner. So starting on 294, but mostly on 295, we have examples of regular verbs and then irregular verbs. Okay, so what the heck does this mean? All right, so if you look on here, regular verbs add ed to form past tense and past participles, right? And so it's like, and then you add ing, right, when you are trying to do helping verbs. So like take the word add. You look at the top of 295. So add is the present tense. You know, then you got past tense. I added the numbers up. Past participle. I have added, right? And I briefly addressed this earlier. I don't even know if your book super gets into it, but the past participle of something is a way of saying like, hey, I have done this before, and you know, like, hey, I have added the numbers up. You know, it's like something that I want to clarify, that instead of just I added, it's like I have added before in my life. You know, it structures that extra kind of information in there versus a present participle. Like we are adding the numbers up right now. You know, it is something we are currently doing. So all of those are really straightforward, right? It's either ed or ing add to the original verb. Bob's your uncle. What are irregular verbs then? Well, that's literally just any verbs that don't fit that pattern. And we've already encountered several of them, right? Like we were talking about to be things like am, are, was, were, stuff like that. So it's like, hey, you know, are is a present tense form of that. Like we are ready. Was can be a past tense. You know, we or that can be was with the singular, like I was, or you can have the plural we were. You have we have been, we are being. So you see how it jumps around like different phrases there. They have some that are a little more straightforward, like become, right? That is the present tense, like I have become the destroyer of worlds. Became is the past tense of that. You know, we became friends. I have become, you know, is a way of saying like, hey, this is something that happened in the past and is still affecting the present. I have become comfortably numb, as the song lyric goes. And then present participle, we are becoming. we are becoming something different. Sounds a little ominous as I say it out loud. So you don't have to memorize them or anything. And once again, this is not nearly all of them, but this is your book's breakdown from the middle of 295 to the tippy top of 297 of the present, past, past participle, and present participle forms of different irregular verbs. And so this is something that I know it sounds dorky. I guess it is kind of dorky, but it doesn't hurt to necessarily have your book out as you are doing your writing. Now, I do highly recommend apps like Grammarly will catch a lot of stuff. But if you find yourself like, wait, am I using the right form of this verb or not? This chapter, that is one of the primary things this chapter can do for you. Okay, and yeah, this is, I guess we'll look at some of these on 297. We're getting into some territory in the book where I'm probably gonna be like, we don't need to go over this. So this might be one of the last sections that we go over. In point of fact, I think it will be actually. All right, so they have a little activity on 297 using the correct form of irregular verbs. So basically, this is a little different. They're giving you the present tense version of a verb, and you're trying to figure out which tense of this or which version of this should you use in this sentence. So for instance, number one is become is the verb. Jillian has become a strong writer. Okay, there we go. That we can just use become as is, because become doesn't change between its present tense form and its past participle form. And one of the things, you'll hear me say this a lot, so sorry in advance, but your ears will often pick up errors that your eyes won't. So I'm a big believer in saying stuff out loud, like saying parts of your essay out loud to catch errors. And sometimes you'll have stuff like, you say out loud, Jillian has became a, oh, that just sounds weird. You may not know the nerd grammar rule for why it sounds weird, but it sounds weird. All right. Here's a more straightforward one. Number three, we've got drink as the verb, present tense verb. The dog blank all the water in her bowl before we came home. Okay, well, we know from the context clues this is something that happened in the past before we came home. The dog drank. Yeah, we have to go with the past tense on that one. Number five, we got go as the verb. James has blank to pick up the pizza. Okay, well, we can't say James has go to pick up the pizza. James has gone, to pick up the pizza. So once again, you might have even written down like go, and and it doesn't, it's late at night, you're doing your exercises, it might look okay. Then you say it out loud, James has go. No, instantly sounds wrong. And I think that's about it. Like, I hope you don't feel shortchanged. There's a little more in the chapter where it talks about like words that can be, confusing, like lend versus loan, lay and lie, sit and set. But honestly, they just don't play a major role in most of your writing. And I'm a big fan of apps like Grammarly that'll catch a lot of these errors for you kind of on the fly. So that's about it. There are some more review exercises at the end of the chapter if you would like to review them. Otherwise, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to text me at 863-835-2399. And y'all have a good one. Bye.